Dracula Chapter XII Dr. Seward's Diary 18th of September. I drove at once to Hingham, and arrived early. Keeping my cab at the gate, I went up the avenue alone. I knocked gently, and rang as quietly as possible, for I feared to disturb Lucy or her mother, and hoped to only bring a servant to the door. After a while of finding no response, I knocked, and rang again. Still no answer. I cursed the laziness of the servants that they should lie abed at such an hour, for it was now 10 o'clock, and so rang and knocked again, but more impatiently, still without response. Hitherto I had blamed only the servants, but now terrible fear began to assail me. Was this desolation but another link in the chain of doom which seemed drawing tight around us? Was it indeed a house of death to which I had come too late? I knew that minutes, even seconds, of delay might mean hours of danger to Lucy, if she had had again one of those fitful relapses, and I went round the house to try if I could find by chance an entry elsewhere. I could find no means of ingress. Every window and door was fastened and locked, and I returned baffled to the porch. As I did so, I heard the rapid pit-pat of a swiftly driven horse's feet. They stopped at the gate, and a few seconds later I met Van Helsing running up the avenue. When he saw me, he gasped out, "Then it was you, and just arrived. How is she? Are we too late? Did you not get my telegram?" I answered as quickly and coherently as I could that I had only just gotten his telegram in the morning, and I had not lost a minute in coming here, and that I could not make anyone in the house hear me. He paused, and raised his hat as he said solemnly, "Then I fear we are too late. God's will be done." With his usual recuperative energy, he went on, "Come, if there be no way open to get in, we must make one. Time is all in all to us now." We went around to the back of the house, where there was a kitchen window. The professor took a small surgical saw from his case, handing it to me, and pointed to the iron bars which guarded the window. I attacked them at once, and had very soon cut through the 3 of them. Then, with a long, thin knife, he pushed back the fastener of the sashes, and opened the window. I helped the professor in, and I followed him. There was no one in the kitchen, or in the servants' room, which were close at hand. We tried all the rooms as we went along, and in the dining room, dimly lit by the rays of light through the shutters, found 4 servant women laying on the floor. There was no need to think them dead, for the stertorous breathing and the acid smell of laudanum in the air left no doubt to their condition. Van Helsing and I looked at each other, and as we moved away we said, "We can attend to them later." Then we ascended to Lucy's room. For an instant or two we paused at the door to listen, but there was no sound that we could hear. With white faces and trembling hands we opened the door gently, and entered the room. Oh, how shall I describe what we saw? On the bed lay 2 women, Lucy and her mother. The latter lay farthest in, and she was covered with a white sheet, the edge of which had been blown back by the draught through the broken window, showing the drawn white face, with a look of terror fixed upon it. By her side lay Lucy, with her face white, and still even more drawn. The flowers which had been around her neck were found upon her mother's bosom, and her throat was bare, showing the 2 little wounds which we had noticed before, but looking horribly white and mangled. Without a word, the professor bent over the bed, his head almost touching poor Lucy's breast. Then he gave a quick turn of his head, as of one who listens, and leaping to his feet, crying out to me, "It is not yet too late. Quick, quick, bring the brandy!" I flew downstairs and returned with it, taking care to smell and taste it, lest it too were drugged like the decanter of sherry which we found upon the table. The maids were still breathing, but more restlessly, and I fancied that the narcotic was finally wearing off. I did not stay to make sure, but returned to Van Helsing, who rubbed the brandy as on another occasion upon her lips and gums, and on her wrists and the palms of her hands. He then said to me, "I can do this, all that can be at the present. We go wake those maids, flick them in the face with a wet towel, and flick them hard, make them get heat and fire and a warm bath. This poor soul is nearly as cold as that beside her. She will need to be heated before we can do anything more." I went at once, and found little difficulty in waking 3 of the women. The 4th was only a young girl, and the drug had evidently affected her much more strongly. So I lifted her slowly upon the sofa and let her sleep. The others were dazed at first, but as the remembrance came back to them, they cried and sobbed in some hysterical manner. I was stern with them, however, and I would not let them talk. I told them that one life was bad enough to lose, and that if we delayed, they would sacrifice Miss Lucy. So, still sobbing and crying, they went about their way, half clad as they were, and prepared the fire and the water. Fortunately, the kitchen and boiler fires were still alive, and there was no lack of hot water. We got a bath, and carried Lucy out as she was and placed her upon it. Whilst we were busy, chafing her limbs, there was a knock at the hall door. One of the maids ran off, hurrying on with some more clothes, and opened it. Then she returned and whispered to us that there was a gentleman who had come with a message from Mr. Holmwood. I bade her simply tell him that we must wait, for he could see no one now. She went away with the message, and engrossed with our work, we clean forgot all about him. I never saw in all my experience Professor work in such deadly earnest. I knew, as he knew, that it was a stand-up fight with death, and in a pause I told him so. He answered me in a way that I did not understand, but with the sternest look that his face could wear. If that were all, I would stop here where we are now, and let her fade away into the peace, for I see no light in life over her horizon. He went on with his work with, if possible, renewed and more frenzied vigor. Presently we both began to be conscious that the heat was beginning to be of some effect. Lucy's heart beat a trifle more audibly to the stethoscope, and her lungs had a perceptible movement. Van Helsing's face almost beamed, and as we lifted her from the bath and rolled her in a hot sheet to dry her, he said to me, "The first gain is ours. Check to the king." We took Lucy into another room, which had by now been prepared, and lay her in bed, and forced a few drops of brandy down her throat. I noticed that Van Helsing tied a soft silk handkerchief round her throat. She was still unconscious, and was quite as bad as, if not worse, than we had ever seen her. Van Helsing called in one of the women, and told her to stay with her, and not to take her eyes off of her till we returned, and then beckoned me out of the room. "We must consult as to what is to be done," he said as we descended the stairs. In the hall he opened the dining-room door. We passed in, he closing the door carefully behind him. The shutters had been opened, but the blinds were already drawn, and with that obedience to the etiquette of death, which the British women of the lower class always rigidly observes, the room was, therefore, dimly dark. It was, however, light enough for our purposes. Van Helsing's sternness was somewhat relieved by a look of perplexity. He was evidently torturing his mind about something, so I waited for an instant, and then he spoke. "What are we to do now? Where are we to turn for help? We must have another transfusion of blood, and that soon, or that Pearl girl's life won't be worth an hour's purchase. You are exhausted. I am exhausted. I fear to trust those women, even if they would have the courage to submit. What are we to do for someone who will open his veins for her?" "What's the matter with me, anyhow?" The voice came from the sofa across the room, and its tones brought relief and joy to my heart, for they were those of the Quincy Morris. Van Helsing started angrily at the first sound, but his face softened, and a glad came into his eyes as I cried out, "Quincy Morris!" and rushed towards him with outstretched hands. "What brought you here?" I cried as our hands met. "I guess art is the cause." He handed me a telegram. "I've not heard from Seward for 3 days, and am terribly anxious. Cannot leave. Father still in some condition. Send me word how Lucy is, and do not delay. Homeward." "I think I came just in the nick of time. You know you have only to tell me what to do." Van Helsing strode forward, and took his hand. Looking him straight in the eyes, he said, "A brave man's blood is the best thing on this earth when a woman is in trouble. You are a man, and no mistake. Well, the devil may work against us for all he's worth, but God sends us men when we want them." Once again we went through the ghastly operation. I have not the heart to go through with the details. Lucy had a terrible shock, and it told on her more than before. For though plenty of blood went into her veins, her body did not respond to the treatment, as well as on the other occasions. Her struggle back into life was something frightful to see and to hear. However, the action of both heart and lungs did improve, and Van Helsing made a subconscious injection of morphia, as before, and with good effect. Her faint became a profound slumber. The professor watched whilst I went downstairs with Quincy Morris, and sent one of the maids to pay off one of the cabmen who were waiting. I left Quincy lying down after having a glass of wine, and told the cook to get ready a very good breakfast. Then a thought struck me, and I went back to the room where Lucy now was. When I came softly in, I found Van Helsing with a sheet or two of notepaper in his hand. He had evidently read it, and was thinking it over as he sat with his hand to his brow. There was a look of grim satisfaction in his face, as of one who has had a doubt solved. He handed me the paper, saying only, "It dropped from Lucy's breast when we carried her to the bath." When I had read it, I stood and looked at the professor, and after a pause I asked him, "In God's name, what does it all mean? Was she, or is she mad? What sort of danger is this?" I was so bewildered that I did not know what to say more. Van Helsing put out his hand and took the paper, saying softly, "Do not trouble about it now. Forget it for the present. You shall know and understand it all in good time, but it will be later. And now what is it that you came to me to say?" This brought me back to fact, and I was all myself again. "I came to speak about the certificate of death. If we do not act properly and wisely, there may be an inquest, and that paper would have to be produced. I in hopes that we need have no guess. There's been a series of little circumstances which have thrown out all our calculations as to Lucy being properly watched, but these shall not occur again. Here we stay until all be well, or ill." Quincy held out his hand. "Count me in," he said. "You and the Dutchman will tell me what to do. I'll do it." When she woke late in the afternoon, Lucy's first movement was to feel in her breast, and to my surprise produced the paper which Van Helsing had given me to read. The careful professor had replaced it where it had come from, lest on waking she should be alarmed. Her eyes lit on Van Helsing, and me too, and she gladdened. Looking about the room, and seeing where she was, she shuddered, and giving a loud cry, she put her thin hands before her pale face. We both understood what that meant, that she had realized to the full her mother's death, so we tried what we could to comfort her. Doubtless sympathy eased her somewhat, but she was very low in thought and very deep in spirit, and wept silently and weakly for quite a long time. We told her that either or both of us would now remain with her all the time, and that seemed to comfort her. Towards dusk she fell into a doze. Here a very odd thing occurred. While still asleep, she took the paper from her breast and tore it in two. Van Helsing stepped over and took the pieces from her. All the same, however, she went on with the action of tearing, as though the material were still within her hands. Finally she lifted her hands and opened them, as though scattering across the fragments. Van Helsing seemed surprised, and his brows gathered as if in thought, but he himself said nothing. 19th of September. All last night she slept so fitfully, being always afraid to sleep, and something weaker when she woke from it. The professor and I took it in turns to watch, and we never left her for a moment unattended. Quincy Morris said nothing about his intention, but I knew all night long he patrolled around and round the house. When day came, its searching light showed the ravages in poor Lucy's strength. She was hardly able to turn her head, and the little nourishment which she could take seemed to do her no good. At times she did sleep, and both Helsing and I noticed the difference in her, between sleeping and waking. Whilst asleep she looked stronger, although more haggard, and her breathing was softer. Her open mouth showed the pale gums drawn back from the teeth, which thus looked positively longer and sharper than usual. When she woke, the softness of her eyes evidently changed the expression, for she looked her own self once again, although a dying one. In the afternoon she asked for Arthur, and we telegraphed for him. Quincy went off to meet him at the station. When we arrived it was nearly 6 o'clock, and the nun was sitting forth and warm, and the red light streamed in through the window, and gave more colour to her pale cheeks. When we saw her, Arthur was simply choking with emotion, and none of us could speak. In the hours that had passed, the fits of sleep, or the comatose condition that passed for it, had grown more frequent, so that the pauses when conversation was possible were shortened. Arthur's presence, however, seemed to act as a stimulant, and she rallied, and spoke to him more brightly than she had done since we arrived. He too pulled himself together and spoke as cheerily as he could, so that the best was made of everything. It is now nearly 1 o'clock, and he and Van Helsing are sitting with her. I am to relieve them in 1/4 of an hour, and I am entering their son Lucy's phonograph. Until 6 o'clock they are to try to rest. I fear that tomorrow will end our watching, for the shock has been too great, and the poor child cannot continue to rally. God help us all. Letter, Mina Harker to Lucy Westerna, unopened by her. 17th of September. My dearest Lucy, it seems an age since I heard from you, or indeed since I even wrote. You will pardon me, I know, for all my faults when you have read all that my budget of news. Well, I got my husband back all right. When we arrived at Exeter there was a carriage waiting for us, and in it, though we had an attack of gout, Mr. Hawkins. He took us to his own house, where there were rooms for us all nice and comfortable, and we dined together. After dinner Mr. Hawkins said, "Oh, my dears, I want to drink your health and prosperity, and may every blessing attend you both. I knew you both from childhood, and have, with love and pride, seen you grow up. Now, I want you to make your home here with me. I have left to me neither chick nor child. All are gone, and I and my will have left you everything." I cried, Lucy dear, as Jonathan and the old man clasped hands. Our evening was a very, very happy one. So here we are, installed in his beautiful old house, and from both my bedroom and drawing-room I can see the great elms of the cathedral close, and their great black stems standing out against the old yellow stone of the cathedral, and I can hear the rooks overhead cawing and chattering and gossiping all the day, after the manner of rooks and humans. I am busy, I need not tell you, arranging things and housekeeping. Jonathan and Mr. Hawkins are busy all the day, for now that Jonathan is a partner, Mr. Hawkins wants to tell him about the clients. How is your dear mother getting on? I wish I could run up to town for a day or two to see you, dear, but I dare not go yet, with so much on my shoulders, and Jonathan wants looking after still. He is beginning to put some flesh on his bones again, but he was terribly weakened by the long illness. Even now he sometimes starts out of his sleep in a sudden way, and awakes all the trembling until I can coax him back to his usual placidity. However, thank God, these occasions are growing less and less frequent as the days go on, and they will in time pass away altogether, I trust. And now I have told you my news, let me ask for yours. When are you to be married, and where? And who is to perform the ceremony? And what are you to wear? And is it to be a public or private wedding? Tell me all about it, dear. Tell me all about everything, for there is nothing which interests you which will not be interesting to me. Jonathan asked me to send his respectful duty, but I do not think that is good enough from the junior partner of the important firm of Hawkins and Harker. And so, as you love me, and he loves me, and I love you with all the moods and tenses of the verb, I send you simply his love instead. Goodbye, my dearest Lucy, and all the blessings to you. Yours, Mina, Miss Harker. Report from Patrick Hennessy, M.D., MRCS, LKQCPI, etc., etc., to John Seward, M.D., 20th of September. My dear sir, in accordance with your wishes, I enclose report of the conditions of everything left in my charge. With regard to patient Renfield, there is more to say. He has had another outbreak, which might have had a dreadful ending, but which is, as fortunately happened, was unattended with any unhappy results. This afternoon a carrier's cart with 2 men made a call at the empty house whose grounds about on ours, the house to which you will remember the patient Trice ran away. The men stopped at our gate to ask the porter their way, as they were strangers. I was myself looking out the study window, having a smoke after dinner, and saw one of them come up to the house. As he passed the window of Renfield's room, the patient began to rate him from within, and called him all the foul names he could lay his tongue to. The man, who seemed a decent fellow enough, contented himself by telling him to shut up the foul-mouthed beggar, whereon our man accused him of robbing him and wanting to murder him, and said he would hinder him if he were to swing for it. I opened the window and signed to the man not to notice, so he contented himself after looking the place over, making up his mind as to what kind of place he had got to by saying, "Lord bless you, sir, I wouldn't mind what was said to me in a bloomin' madhouse. I pity ye and the governor for having to live in the house with a wild beast like that." Then he asked his way civilly enough. I told him where the gate of the empty house was, and he went away, followed by the threats and curses and revilings from our man. I went down to see if I could make out any cause for this anger, since he is usually such a well-behaved man, and I expect his violent fists nothing of the kind had ever occurred. I found him, to my astonishment, quite composed, and most genial in his manner. I tried to get him to talk of the incident, but he blandly asked me questions as to what I meant, and led me to believe that he was completely oblivious to the affair. It was, I am sorry to say, however, only another instance of his cunning, for within half an hour I heard of him again. This time he had broken out through the window of his room, and was running down the avenue. I called to the attendants to follow me, and I chased him, for I feared he was intent upon some mischief. My fear was justly justified, when I saw the same cart which had passed before coming down the road, having it on it some great wooden boxes. The men were wiping their foreheads, and were flushed in the face, as if with violent exercise. Before I could get up to him, the patient rushed upon them, and pulling one of them off the cart, began to knock his head against the ground. If I had not seized him just as the moment, I believe he would have killed the man there and then. The other fellow jumped down and struck him over the head with the butt end of his heavy whip. It was a terrible blow, but he did not seem to mind it, and seized upon this new man also, and struggling with all three of us, pulling us to and fro as if we were the kittens. And you know I am no lightweight, and the others were both burly men. At first he was silent in his fighting, but as we began to master him, and the attendants pulled the strait waistcoat upon him, he began to shout, "I'll frustrate them. They shan't rob me. They shan't murder me by inches. I'll fight for my lord and master," and all sorts of similar incoherent ravings. It was with a very considerable difficulty that they got him back into the house, and placed him within the padded room. One of the attendants, Hardy, had a finger broken. However, I set it to right, and he is going on well. The two carriers were at first loud in their threats of actions for damages, and promised to rain all the penalties of the law upon us. The threats were, however, mingled with some sort of indirect apology for the defeat of the two of them by a single feeble madman. They said if they had not been for the way their strength had been spent in carrying and raising those heavy boxes to the cart, they would have made of short work of him. They gave us another reason for their defeat, the extraordinary state of drought to which they had been reduced by the dusty nature of their occupation, and the reprehensible distance from the scene of their labours, of any place of public entertainment. I quite understood their drift, and after a stiff glass of grog, or rather more of the same, and with each a sovereign in hand, they made a light of the attack, and swore that they would encounter a worse madman any day for the pleasure of meeting so bloomin' good a bloke as your correspondent. I took their names and addresses, in case they might be needed. They are as follows: Jack Smollett of Dudding Rents, King Road; Great Walworth and Thomas Snelling, Peter Parley's Row, Guide Court, Bethnal Green. They are both in the employment of Harrison's Sons, a moving and shipment company, Orange Master's Yard, Soho. I shall report to you any matter of interest occurring here, and shall wire you at once if there is anything of great importance. Believe me, dear sir, yours faithfully, Patrick Hensey. Letter, Mina Harker to Lucy Westerna, unopened by her, 18th of September. My dearest Lucy, such a sad blow has befallen us. Mr. Hawkins has died very suddenly, and some may not think it so sad for us, but we had both come to so love him, and it really seems as though that we had lost a father. I never knew either father or mother, so that the dear old man's death is truly a blow to me. Jonathan is also greatly distressed. It is not only that he feels sorrow, a deep sorrow, for the dear good man, who has befriended him all of his life, and now at the end has treated him like his own son, and leaving him a fortune, which to people of our modest bringing up is wealth beyond the dreams of avarice. But Jonathan feels it on another account. He says the amount of responsibility which it puts upon him makes him nervous. He begins to doubt himself. I do try to cheer him up, and my belief in him helps him to have a belief in himself. But it is here that the grave shock that he experienced tells upon him the most. Oh, it is too hard with a sweet, simple, noble, strong nature such as his. A nature which, enabling him by our dear good friend's aid to rise from clerk to master in a few years, should be so injured that the very essence of his strength is gone. Oh, forgive me, dear, if I worry you with my troubles in the midst of your own happiness. But, Lucy, dear, I must tell someone, for the strain of keeping up a brave and cheerful appearance to Jonathan does tire me, and I have no one here that I can confide in. I dread coming up to London, as we must do the day after tomorrow, for poor Mr. Hawkins left in his will that he was to be buried in the grave with his father. As there are no relations, Jonathan will have to be chief mourner. I shall try to run over to see you, dearest, if only for a few moments. Forgive me for troubling you. With all blessings, your loving Mina Harker. Dr. Seward's Diary, the 20th of September. Only resolution and habit can let me make an entry tonight. I am miserable, low-spirited, and sick of the world and all in it, including life itself, that I would not care if I heard this moment the flapping of the wings of an angel of death. And he has been flapping those grim wings to some purpose of late. Lucy's mother, Arthur's father, and now let me get on with my work. I duly relieved Van Helsing in his watch over Lucy. We wanted Arthur to get some rest also, but he refused. It was only when I told him that we would want him to help us during the day, and that he must not all break down for want of rest, lest Lucy should suffer, that he agreed to go. Van Helsing was very kind to him. "Come, my child," he said, "come with me. You are sick and weak, and have had much sorrow and much mental pain, as well as that tax on your strength that we know of. You must not be alone, for to be alone is to be full of fears and alarms. Come to the drawing-room. There is a big fire and 2 sofas. You shall lie upon one and I the other, and our sympathy will be comfort to each other, even though we do not speak, and even if we do sleep." Arthur went off with him, casting back a longing look upon Lucy's face, which lay upon her pillow, almost whiter than the lawn. She lay quite still, and I looked round the room to see that all was as it should be. I could see that the professor had carried out in this room, as in the other, his purpose of using the garlic. The whole of the window sashes reeked with it, and round Lucy's neck, over the silk handkerchief, which Van Helsing made her keep on, was a rough chaplet of the same order's flowers. Lucy was breathing somewhat strenuously, and her face was at its worst, for the open mouth showed the pale gums. Her teeth, in the dim, uncertain light, seemed longer and sharper than they had been in the morning. In particular, by some trick of the light, the canine teeth looked longer and sharper than the rest. I sat down by her, and presently she moved uneasily. At the same moment there came a sort of dull flapping and buffeting at the window. I went over to it softly, peeping out by the corner of the blind. There was full moonlight, and I could see that the noise was made by a great bat, which did wheel around, doubtless attracted by the light, although dim, and every now and again struck the window with its wings. When I came back to my seat, I found that Lucy had moved slightly, and had torn away the garlic flowers from her throat. I replaced them as well as I could, and I sat watching her. Presently she woke, and I gave her food, as Van Helsing had prescribed. She took but little, and that languidly. There did not seem to be with her now the unconscious struggle for life and strength that so hitherto marked her illness. It struck me as curious that the moment she became conscious, she pressed the garlic flowers close to her. It was certainly odd that whenever she got into the lethargic state, with the stertorous breathing, she pulled the flowers from her. But when she woke, she clutched them close. There was no possibility of making any mistake about this, for in the long hours that followed she had many spells of sleeping and waking, and repeated both the actions many times. At 6 o'clock Van Helsing came to relieve me. Arthur then fallen into a doze, and mercifully we let him sleep on.
When he saw Lucy's face, I could hear the hissing and drawn of his breath, and he said to me as a sharp whisper, "Drop the blind. I want the light." Then he bent down, and with his face almost touching Lucy's, examined her quite carefully. He removed the flowers and lifted the silk handkerchief from her throat. As he did so, he started back, and I could hear his ejaculation, "Mein Gott!" as it was smothered in his throat. I bent over and looked too, and as I noticed, a queer chill came over me. The wounds on the throat were gone. For fully 5 minutes, Van Helsing stood looking down upon her, with his face at its sternest. Then he turned to me and said most calmly, "She is dying. It will not be long now. It will be much different. Mark me, whether she dies conscious or in her sleep, wake that poor boy, and let him come, and to see the last, for he trusts us, and we have promised him." I went to the dining room, and I waked him. He was dazed for a moment, but when he saw the sunlight streaming in through the edges of the shutters, he thought he was late, and expressed his fear. I assured him Lucy was still asleep, but I told him as gently as I could that both Van Helsing and I feared that the end was quite near. He covered his face with his hands and slid down upon his knees. Here he remained, perhaps a minute, with his head buried, praying. His shoulders shook with grief. I slowly took him by the hand and raised him. "Come," I said, "my dear old fellow, summon all your fortitude. It'll be best and easiest for her." When we came into Lucy's room, I could see that Van Helsing had, with his usual forethought, been putting matters straight and making everything looking as pleasing as possible. He had even brushed Lucy's hair, so that it lay on the pillow in its usual sun-ray ripples. And we came into the room. She opened her eyes, and seeing him, whispered so softly, "Arthur, oh my love, I am so glad you have come." He stooped to kiss her, when Van Helsing motioned him back. "No," he whispered, "not yet. Hold her hand. It will comfort her more." So Arthur took upon her hand and knelt beside her, and looked her best, and all the soft lines matching the angelic beauty of her eyes. Gradually, her eyes closed, and she sank to sleep. For a little bit her breast heaved softly, and her breath came, and it went like a tired child's. And then, insensibly, there came the strange change which I had noticed in the night. Her breathing grew strict, the mouth opened, and the pale gums, drawn back, made the teeth look much longer and sharper than ever. In a sort of sleep-waking, vague, unconscious way she opened her eyes, which were now dull and hard at once, and she said in a soft, but oh so voluptuous voice, such as I have never heard from her lips, "Arthur, oh my love, I am so glad you have come. Kiss me." Arthur bent eagerly over to kiss her, but at that instant Van Helsing, who like me had been startled upon her voice, swooped upon him, and catching him by the neck with both hands, dragged him back with a fury of strength I had never thought he could have possessed, actually hurling him across the room. "Not for your life," he said, "not for your living soul and hers." And he stood between them like a lion at bay. Arthur, so taken back, he did not for a moment know what to do or what to say. And before any true impulse of violence could seize him, he realized the place and the occasion, and he stood silent, waiting. I kept my eyes fixed upon Lucy, as did Van Helsing. We saw a spasm of rage fit like a shadow across her face. The sharp teeth champed together. Then her eyes closed. She breathed heavily. Very shortly after she opened her eyes, all in their softness, and putting out her poor pale thin hand, took Van Helsing's great brown one. Drawing it close to her, she kissed it. "My true friend," she said, in a faint voice, oh so small, but with untellable pathos. "Oh, my true friend, and his. Oh, do guard him. Give him peace." "I swear it," said he solemnly, kneeling beside her and holding up his hand, as one who registers an oath. Then he turned to Arthur and said to him, "Come, my child, take her hand in yours, and kiss her on the forehead, only the once." Their eyes met instead of their lips, and so they parted. Lucy's eyes closed, and Van Helsing, who had been watching closely, took Arthur's arm and drew him away. And then Lucy's breathing became stertorous again, all at once ceasing. "It is over," said Van Helsing. "She is dead." I took Arthur by the arm, led him away to the drawing-room. Here he sat down and covered his face with his hands, sobbing in a way that nearly broke me down to see. I went back to the room, and found Van Helsing looking at the poor Lucy, and his face was sterner than ever. Some change had come over her body. Death had given her back part of her beauty, for her brow and cheeks had recovered some of their flowing lines. Even the lips had lost their deadly pallor. It was as if the blood, no longer needed for the working of the heart, had gone to make the harshness of death as little rude as might be. We thought her dying while she slept, and sleeping when she died. I stood beside Van Helsing and spoke. "Ah, well, poor girl, there is peace for her at last. It is the end." He turned to me, and he said with the gravest of solemnity, "Not so. Not so, alas. This is only the beginning." When I asked him what he meant, he only shook his head and answered, "We can do nothing as of yet. We can do nothing but wait. Wait and see."